It doesn't take a genius to figure out that between last season and this season, just about everything has changed for the Kraken, other than some of the players, and, well, here we are once again at the end of the season, and honestly, a loss might not be the worst thing. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken do fall 4-1 in Las Vegas, ending their 5-game win streak. But, as I just said, it might not be the worst thing for the Kraken to have lost this game. Now sure, if they had won these last 2 games as we mentioned, there's a decent chance, actually if they had won the last 2 games, they would have been guaranteed to move up in the standings to the 3rd spot in the division, but that could also end up getting them a first round matchup against a red hot Oilers team. Might be the hottest team in the NHL right now, at least up there with the Bruins if nothing else. And of all the matchups the Kraken still could have even with a game remaining in this first round, that's probably the one you'd least like to see with how the Oilers are playing right now. And yes, I know it's the playoffs and there's no easy matchups. In fact, for what it's worth, if the Kraken do stay in this top wildcard spot, which seems most likely, at this point, their most likely opponent is the next hottest team in the Colorado Avalanche. So it could very well be the worst of 2 evils as far as who the Kraken face in the first round. They could still face the Stars or the Golden Knights, depending on what happens in the last game for these teams, or 2 games in the case of the Avalanche and Stars. But it is starting to seem like if the Kraken are going to make noise in these playoffs, they're going to have to do it against one of the NHL's best teams going in. So when it really comes down to it at this point, especially with the Kraken fate completely out of their hands as far as who they could end up facing, really the biggest thing for them, other than playing one more strong game to go into the playoffs the right way, is to avoid injury. And for what it's worth, it seems like in these last couple of games, that was definitely something Hackstall was taking into consideration, as we saw Vince Dunn be a healthy scratch for the first time, I think, in his Kraken career, certainly this season anyway, in the last game against Arizona, which was definitely just a way of saying, you know what, we really don't need to play all of our guys in both halves of this back-to-back. And that same thing was true in this game, as Geeky, Schultz, and Susie all ended up sitting for this game in Vegas as healthy scratches, which, especially with both Schultz and Susie being scratches in this game, did mean that we got the 3rd defensive pairing of Cale Fleury and Jacob Magna, who normally, if that was your 3rd pair, based on how the Kraken have played those 2 players since having them, I mean, Fleury they've had the entire season, but Magna since they picked him up a couple weeks before the trade deadline, you'd think that they probably get like 10 minutes, maybe edging towards 15 if they're really feeling like playing them in a game that's out of hand. But no, they got a full 18-19 minutes in this game, showing that the Kraken were pretty much just going even load all the way and trying to get through this one, minimizing the risk to their players. I mean, heck, the first pairing of Dunn and Larson that's been averaging 24 to 25 minutes a game throughout the season just got 21 minutes in this game. So yeah, some pretty clear time management in this back-to-back being done in both games, whether that was scratches or just time on ice. And while I would imagine that we do end up seeing the full starting lineup, as it will probably be in game 1 in the final game of the season against Vegas at home, I wouldn't be surprised if a similar trend appears as far as the ice time that players get. Still, even with all that going on, even though the final score of this game might make it look a bit lopsided, and I do think the right team as far as who played better ended up winning this game, it was played, I think, a lot closer than the 4-1 score would suggest, especially throughout the first couple of periods, where really the entire first period was played pretty evenly. Vegas does start to get a little bit of momentum going after a pretty locked down first few minutes, and eventually on a rush chance they end up scoring as a pass gets through the crease to the far side where Amadio's waiting, and it just barely gets through, as well as I'm pretty sure Larson tipped this puck, or not tipped it, but got a piece of it, just not quite enough to fully break up that pass. It ends up getting through Larson to Amadio, and there's no chance for Decord. This one's in the back of the net to give Vegas the 1-0 lead early on, or a few minutes into the game, not like it was in the first 5 minutes or anything like that. But eventually, although it does take a few more minutes, the Kraken, who, to be fair, had struggled to even get shots on goal through the first few minutes of this game, eventually get some momentum going their way and hold that momentum for a while, getting a number of shots on goal and really closing that gap that had built through the first 10 minutes of the game. And early on in that press, it's a rush chance of their own off of a steal in the neutral zone by Bjorkstrand. He gets it up to Gord, who gets in on a partial break. A breakaway kind of along the side, as if he had tried to get towards the middle. There was a guy there. Still, it's a wide open shot from the faceoff dot, and he puts it right past the goaltender and into the net to tie the game at 1. Gord, his 14th on the season. Still not going to hit 20 like Bjorkstrand and 5 other Kraken players have this season. But as we know, he continues to contribute to this team in many more ways than just point scoring or goal scoring for that matter. And as we mentioned, this scored goal really seems to spark some energy for the Kraken as they maintain momentum out of it, and for most of the rest of the first period, even ending the first period on a power play. But I mean, you saw the final score. They only score this one goal, and that does become a problem when early on in the second period, and I actually mean early on within the first couple of minutes, it's another rush chance and a bit of a tough shift here for Borgen as he turns over the puck at the blue line on the offensive end and then gets beat to the net back at the other end, where another centering pass for Amadio as Amadio crashes the net in front of Borgen. He tips it in past Decord. Again, not a ton Decord could do about this other than, I guess, try to break up the pass by poking his stick out in the passing lane. But really, it's just a nice play by Amadio to get past the defender, Borgen in this case, and crash the net, and a great centering pass to get it to him for that tip-in. To Seattle's credit, though, again, after another Vegas goal, they prevent Vegas from getting momentum, and if anything, get a little bit of momentum themselves back the other way. But honestly, the rest of the second period, or at least the next 10 minutes or so, which includes a Vegas power play, really don't feature a whole lot of dangerous chances. Both teams trading shots on goal up and down the ice throughout, again, the middle part of this period, but neither one really making the goaltender's jobs too hard. At least not until once we get into the later part of the second period, Vegas, once again on a rush chance, this time with numbers, does beat the Kraken defense, and once again it's Amadio, this time with the puck, gets a wide open chance to just crash the net without anyone challenging him. Decord comes up with a huge save, but it bounces off of his pad right out in front, and the next guy to it is another Vegas player. This time it's Riley Smith, and he puts it in past Decord. Again, not much Decord could do after making the first save other than hope he has a defender there to clear the puck. He doesn't. Vegas scores off the rebound, and it's 3-1. And then shortly after the faceoff, Decord has to come up with a couple more saves to prevent it from quickly becoming 4-1, which he's able to do. Eventually, the Kraken collect themselves and make a press to at least get a bit closer towards the end of the second period, but as we know, they aren't able to do so. And then early on in the third, once again, more issues for the Kraken, this time in the form of special teams. And I gotta say, I do kind of have to agree with Hackstall here, as the call on the ice is a minor for both Frodin and Borgen. I mean, don't get me wrong, I can definitely see an argument for one call or the other. Both were certainly borderline and could easily have been penalties, but to call both of them here, that was definitely a pretty soft call here from the officials. Sure, if we were going to pretend like we're living in a world where hockey, at least at an NHL level, is called by the book, then yeah, both of these are probably penalties. But we know that that's not the case, and especially after one penalty is called, the refs basically swallow their whistle unless there's just something so blatantly obvious they have no choice but to call it. That was definitely not the case here. But, I mean, again, at least it's not really in a game that matters for much. Vegas already had a 3-1 lead at this point, and it's not like the Kraken ended up scoring enough where whatever happens at this power play ends up being the deciding factor in the game. But Vegas does end up getting, apparently for the first time in their franchise history, a full 2-minute 5-on-3, which they would not need very much of, as another shot ends up taking a weird bounce in front of Decord out to a guy on the far side who has basically an empty net to shoot at. He hits that net again with not a ton Decord can do about it. Just, I think, 17 seconds into the 5-on-3, the Kraken do kill off the rest of the second penalty, but at this point, the game's pretty much out of hand. The Kraken do end up getting one more power play, actually not long after this Vegas set of power plays. They don't really do anything with it whatsoever. Frodin at some point here does end up hitting a post, I think actually early on in the third. It stays out, obviously, because it hit the post. Even if he beats the goaltender, he doesn't beat the plumbing. And really, the rest of the third period, it seemed like this was a Kraken team that was playing their sixth period of hockey in 2 days, and at the end of a season, with knowing that this game really didn't make a huge difference to them as far as what is ahead of them in the playoffs. So, not a ton of energy shown the rest of the way, which does lead to a couple more chances for Vegas midway through the period that Decord makes a couple of very nice saves on. And really, for what it's worth, I did think Decord actually had a pretty good game in this one. It's certainly one of those where the stat line is going to tell a different story from how I think he played. He made a number of pretty big saves in this, but just got hung out to dry, if not so much by bad defense. A couple of occasions that may have been the case, but more just some unfortunate bounces and things that were out of the Kraken and certainly out of Decord's control ending up past him. Anyway, as we know, the Kraken aren't able to mount a comeback or even the start of a comeback throughout the rest of this third, so the game does end 4-1. And again, this is a game where it's the second half of a back-to-back. You could tell, although they made pushes every time Vegas scored to try to answer those scores, and in one case was able to, they just didn't really seem to have the energy, whether it's the end of the season, knowing that you still have more hockey in the playoffs, so trying to conserve a little bit of what's left in the tank, as well as it being that second half of a back-to-back. It just clearly wasn't all there for the Kraken in this game, even outside of the fact that not all their starters were on the ice. So the fact that they played decently defensively against a good team in Vegas with a few lapses that cost them, I don't know. I don't think there's really a lot to take out of this game. It certainly wasn't a game that they played well enough where you're feeling at ease with going into the playoffs, regardless of who the Kraken face, but it wasn't a game that they played poorly enough where you're feeling like they're just going to get swept out of the first round. Either way, it's less likely with the outcome of this game that Vegas is going to be that first round matchup, so it might not be something the Kraken have to worry about, at least until later on, when it comes to this specific opponent anyway. Stepping outside of just the hockey aspect of this game for a second, though, and normally I wouldn't bother bringing this up, but it was so noticeable, I feel like I kind of have to. The biggest and, again, most noticeable difference between these last two games was definitely the setting of them, where the last game, even though it was NHL players, it was very clearly not being played in an NHL building, whether that was the angle of the camera or the fact that, for whatever reason, there seemed to be a ton of glare coming off of the ice that made it kind of harder to see than normal what was going on. I don't know if that was just me, the TV that I was watching it on, but it's same TV I've watched other games on and never noticed that much glare. Either way, it really did remind me of watching like the Frozen 4, for example. Whereas then a day later, this game, you're in a full-size NHL arena, and not just a full-size newer NHL arena, but the one that brings the most bells and whistles when it comes to things happening around the ice. You've got cheerleaders in gold standing in the aisles that you can clearly see in the background, not to mention the flashing lights and smoke cannons that they shoot off whenever their team scores a goal. Yeah, just a very noticeable difference in the surroundings of the game, even if the game itself left a little bit to be desired as far as an entertainment is concerned. I don't know, maybe it was just me. You can let me know down in the comment section if you agree or disagree, but that difference in setting did seem particularly noticeable between these two games. Just about as noticeable as, say, a regular season game to a playoff game, and we'll get to see that difference here in a short time. As for the Kraken 3 stars in this game, honestly, it's a little bit difficult for me to come up with 3 that I feel good about giving stars to. Again, they didn't play a terrible game, but it certainly was not the most energetic or inspired game of hockey either. I certainly will give a first star to Joey Decord. Again, his stat line is not going to make it look like he should get a star here, but he really played a fantastic game. And again, to come off of not getting the start at the college that he went to, and then to have to face a Golden Knights team that, even if they're missing a couple of their best players, is still a very good team, and it showed on the ice. He played fantastic. Second star, I think I do feel good about giving Frodin a star in this game. Again, for a guy that's been kind of a role player here and there and stepping in for the Kraken with a couple of injuries and been in and out of the lineup. Honestly, he earned his way to even getting a somewhat on and off again role when he just stepped in earlier on in this season because they couldn't bring Hayden up again without worrying about losing him to waivers. So Froden took advantage of that and has run with it. Sure, he's not a starter and he's not going to be anything more than he plays outside the fourth line, but that kind of a player. For the role that he has on the team, honestly, I felt like he's played pretty well for the Kraken. Again, just showing the depth that this team has. Sure, the scoring certainly isn't there from him, but he's had a fair number of chances and just hasn't gotten one to go yet. Who knows? Maybe if he gets into the playoffs, that will start to happen. It definitely can happen where suddenly a random guy just gets hot in the playoffs and it could be him. Okay, realistically, probably not, but who knows? Maybe he gets a goal or two. And then as for a third star, this one I think we might be reaching a bit to be giving out a star here, but what the heck? It's the end of the season. And again, I don't think this was a bad enough game necessarily to just give out 1 or 2 stars. So I'll give it to Daniel Sprong, who honestly played better defensively in this game than he did offensively. And that really is saying that he had a pretty decent game defensively, one of the few Kraken players that had a good game defensively in this one. I mean, I suppose credit where it's due, he certainly hasn't been the best defensive player for the Kraken this season, especially in the back half of the season where he's been more often than not downright bad on the back check or in the Kraken end. Again, though, in this game, he had a positive impact on the defensive end and was one of few Kraken players that I think I could say that about. Is also the reason that I didn't give Gord or Bjorkstrand, the only 2 Kraken players with points in this game, stars, because in a weird turn of events, that line was probably the worst forward line defensively, just a tough night for them on the back check, which is very uncharacteristic. That has been the strength of that line since it was put together early on in the season. But weirdly enough, it's Sprong and his line that actually had a small but positive impact defensively, while the best back-checking line for the Kraken had one of their worst nights in that way. Which I suppose if they're going to have a game like this, it might as well happen before the playoffs start, as long as it doesn't start a trend. But knowing Gord, I don't think there's any way that a trend like that could start with a line that he is the leader of. As always, though, feel free to disagree with me down in the comments section who your 3 stars would be, and general feelings on this game, or just if you have feelings on it and its impact on how you're feeling about the team going into the playoffs. For me, I don't think this game really has much of an impact about how I feel this team is playing going in. If a similar style of thing happens in the final game of the season, as far as lackluster energy and all that, I might be a little bit worried, but again, I think there's some, we'll say, business decisions being made here from the Kraken, and even the Golden Knights, as there were a couple of times where things could have gotten chippy in this game, but didn't, as both teams kind of had this look of, look, we've got more hockey coming up. Let's just not for now. With that, though, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. If you did like or enjoy this video, there are buttons for that kind of stuff down below that help support the channel, so I'd appreciate you using them. And until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.